Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us. We're really glad to have you join us. And we know from the stats that we have people possibly join us from up to 66 countries today, which is a really amazing transnational experience. And we're really glad that you're with us. A very warm welcome to this is the first masterclass of our digital capitalism course. My name is Nick Buxton. I'm the director of the Knowledge Hub at TNI and one of the co-organizers of this course. And we're really delighted to have so many people who've already signed up to this course. We put on this course because we kept hearing in our different dimensions of our work and our different programs from activists around the world that they were finding it hard to grapple with the implications of digitalization for their own struggles. So much of the information we receive these days is either corporate hype, technical jargon, or nationalistic fear-mongering. Very little of the news or analysis we receive actually penetrates through to expose the real motives and actors profiting from digital transformations and those who are losing out. And almost no one looks at the economic system that underlies technological change, capitalism, that both shapes and is shaped by digitalization. So we decided, a number of us within TNI, that we wanted to provide this introductory course to start to unpack some of the key dimensions of digital capitalism. It is our first attempt to do this, and we're using an open source teaching platform we've not used before, Moodle, that we wanted to kind of pull these resources together. So we will, of course, in this process, make mistakes and appreciate your patience. We also have a very varied audience from what we can see of people with no knowledge on the subject to those who study it professionally. We've tried to provide resources for different levels of expertise, but we prefer to veer towards being more simplistic and accessible rather than being overcomplicated. But we really hope, whoever you are and whatever you know, that it is a useful course for you. We're very open to feedback and suggestions to make it better, so feel free to contact us at any point by emailing digitalcapitalism@tni.org. We know that with your support and feedback, we can keep improving the course so that it becomes a great resource to support activists and movements fighting for social and environmental justice. I want to say a little bit about the people involved in the course. Perhaps, Jess, you could show some of the slides. The first, I want to say that this was kind of initiated by TNI and a lot of work done by TNI, but has been very much supported and co-sponsored by three key organizations: IT for Change, and Guru is from IT for Change, and today we'll be speaking. They also contributed to some of the materials. SOMO, which is a Center for Study of Multinationals in Netherlands, and State Watch, which is based in Europe, and particularly helped with the fifth one where we look at securitization. Next slide. As most people will have seen this, but for those who haven't, these are kind of the 6 themes. We had a big discussion, lots of grappling about what to include and what to not include, and we definitely have got huge gaps in this, but this is generally the themes that we wanted to explore. This one today is very much a kind of overview, some of the big themes and issues. Then we will be drilling into kind of big tech and particularly the key players and some of the struggles to take on big tech companies such as Meta and Google and so on. Then we will have a session on digital colonialism, looking really much at the geopolitics of data and development, before honing in particularly on the issue of trade, which is one that TNI has developed particular expertise, and Sofia, who's on the panel today, leads that work. Then we'll have the 5th session on digitalization and the security state, looking at the ways that it intersects with security, big corporations, and also state surveillance. And then the last one looking at what is alternative, or you could say alternatives, and some of the different, both the resistance and also some of the proposals for different ways of both tackling big tech power and building the kind of digital world that we actually want to live in. So these are some of the organizers. So when you email Digital Capitalism or when you hear from us, these are the people you'll be hearing from. Sofia, who's speaking today, myself, Pia, who also works in Argentina for Fair Work and is a researcher on the platform economy. And then also, my screen has been slightly blocked, Jess, who's doing a lot of, well, you can see her title there, Moral Hyper, Chaos Resolver, and Community Builder. We couldn't do this without her. And then there's people behind the scenes I just wanted to credit, particularly Guillermo Moria from Bolivia, who set up the Moodle website, and Jorrit Stoker, who does a lot of our emails and the webmasters, and our key webmaster. Next slide. Now, of course, I can't help noticing the irony of talking about big tech and digital capitalism and being on a platform like Zoom. So I just wanted to say that we have a policy within TNI to use open source technologies wherever possible, but this isn't always possible. We've tried alternatives to Zoom, but nothing scales yet at the level that we could make it function. So we will be using, so before anyone shouts hypocrite, we live in a capitalist world, and we will, where possible, we're exploring alternatives, but we sometimes have to depend on some big tech solutions, whilst also fighting and looking to replace those. Hopefully many of you have logged on. We see that not everyone has yet logged on to the Moodle course. We will actually have a webinar tomorrow, a troubleshooting session if you have any troubles logging onto Moodle, which will be at 2 p.m. Later we'll post the link in the chat, but you'll see in there that there are some core reading, there's a bit more further resources, videos and essays that are worth reading, there are quizzes, and there's a forum where you can both put your own proposals, suggestions, and also questions. Next, please. So we come now to this week's webinar, which is and Masterclass, which is what is digital capitalism. Very much our goal in this session is to complement the materials you'll have read in the course, and also to allow you to ask questions from 3 experts in this field. At any point in this discussion, you can ask your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I forgot to mention that this session is unfortunately only in English. We do have, so we don't have interpretation. We do hope to run, based on the success of this course, something in Spanish at a later stage. And throughout the session, we'll also be sharing links to resources and further reading in the chat box. We also know that there's a lot of knowledge among the attendees, so you'll feel free to share your own thoughts and links too. So for this masterclass, I'm really glad to be joined by 3 great speakers. The first is Cory Doctorow. He's a prolific writer and a brilliant science fiction novelist, and journalist and technology activist. He was the opening author for our 2023 State of Power report, and he produced one of the interviews, which is one of the most popular read pieces that year. So we're really delighted he's joined us today. He's also a special consultant to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, whose resources we draw on considerably. They're a non-profit civil liberties group that defends freedom in technology, law, policy, standards, and treaties. And his most recent books include The Lost Cause, a solar punk science fiction novel of hope amidst the climate emergency, and The Internet Con, How to Seize the Means of Computation, which really draws out some of the arguments he made in the interview that we featured last year. Then we have Gurumurthy Kasinathan, who's a founding member and director of IT for Change, one of our key partner co-organizers for this course. Gurumurthy, or Guru, has 35 years of experience in the area of public education and technology, including research, demonstration projects, systemic reform, and policy advocacy. His current projects include designing and developing a public AI for school education in collaboration with the state government of Kerala in India. Guru has been very associated with civil society networks who work on digital society issues, and particularly with the World Summit on Information Society and the Internet Governance Forum for over 20 years. He has been visiting faculty at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and prior to that with Oracle Financial Software Services, producing technology for the BFI sector. And finally, but not least, we have Sofia Scasserra, who's a colleague of mine. She's an associate researcher with the Transnational Institute, who specializes on digital economy, labor, trade, and development. As I've mentioned, she's a co-organizer of this course and also a researcher at the World Labour Institute at Universidad Nacional 3 de Febrero in Argentina, and an advisor to the international trade union movement. For this first session, rather than having a traditional panel of speeches followed by Q&A, we wanted it to have more of a conversation. So I have some big, broad, challenging questions for our guests that we will use to open the conversation and then open up to all of you to ask the questions you have. So as we start the conversation, do keep adding your questions to the Q&A. So my first question to the three of you, Guru, Cory, and Sofia, is how would you define digital capitalism? I don't know if it's possible, but we actually asked that same question to the people in the Moodle course, and I just wanted to, Jess, do we have the slide for that? Just what people came back with? So you can see a little bit about when we ask people to define it, just so Cory, Guru, and Sofia, you got a bit of a chance. You can see some of the things. This is obviously one of those word clouds. You can see some of the things coming through, which of course was interesting. The biggest one there is exploitation. So I'm going to turn to you first, Cory. How do you define digital capitalism? Is it a term you use and find useful?
Well, I think there are three really important characteristics that describe contemporary digital capitalism. So the first one would be that it's dominated by platforms. Platforms are so-called two-sided markets, so they have two different distinct kinds of stakeholders apart from their shareholders. The first being end users, and the second being business customers. So think here of Uber playing matchmaker between drivers and passengers. There are lots of forms of capitalism that don't look like this. This is a specifically very digital kind of capitalism. The second really important factor here is that digital capitalism is the first new industry to emerge simultaneous with the drawdown of competition law enforcement all around the world. So historically, one of the US's most successful exports was relatively robust competition law that grows out of the American rejection of the robber barons of the Gilded Age. And so you get these laws that view competition not just as a good in itself, not just as a way of like making capitalists better at making stuff that we like, but also as a way of averting state capture by large concentrated industries. Very famously, the first American antitrust law is the Sherman Act from 1890. And Senator Sherman, for whom it's named, said that if Americans would not tolerate a king, they shouldn't tolerate an autocrat of trade. It was a specific concern that the role of the state becomes usurped by firms when firms are sufficiently concentrated. And that approach, excuse me, to antitrust ended, or competition law rather, ended in the late 1970s. Basically, they shot it in the guts the same year that Ronald Reagan went on the campaign trail, the same year that the Apple II Plus hit the shelves. And so tech is the first industry where the bigger it got, the fewer competition law constraints it faced. The US had historically exported this to Europe through the Marshall Plan after the World War II, and so European law looked much like American law. And as we see the drawdown in America, we see a simultaneous drawdown in Europe. So it is the most monopolized, or it is the sector that found itself monopolizing most readily relative to other sectors. And then the third piece that's important here, because there are other monopolies and there are other platforms, but the thing that makes digital different is flexibility. A digital platform can change its business logic very quickly. And so I'll give a very quick example here. If you're an Uber driver, you are subject to something the scholar Vina Dubal calls algorithmic wage discrimination. And that describes how two different drivers sitting in cars next to each other, being offered the same ride, the same drive, will get different offers. And the driver who was most recently most selective, right, turned down the most rides, will get a higher per kilometer per minute rate than the driver who is more selective. And as that driver becomes less selective, the driver takes the offer and then takes the next one, the next one. The Uber wage pricing algorithm starts to toggle down the wage that's on offer. But if the driver responds by being more selective, it toggles it back up again. So this is a very crude trick. It's just done very quickly and in a highly automated way. There's nothing about the bosses of the 19th century that made them like morally or intellectually incapable of imagining or desiring this. They just didn't have the like labor force. There just weren't enough people in like green eye shades writing numbers in ledgers with quill pens to allow them to do this kind of wage discrimination. And so on a platform, the the business logic, the offer that the platform makes both to users and to workers or suppliers changes from minute to minute. And so you can think of this as a shell game. And a shell game is just a very simple set of maneuvers, but it's done very quickly. And so if you do something simple fast enough and consistently enough, it can kind of look like magic. And it can certainly be hard for humans to defend ourselves against because the robot doesn't get tired. The robot is always there looking for the moment in which you accept the lower wage, and then it titers your wage down by small increments. And you have to be sitting there with your notebook writing down, oh, the last time I took a 10-kilometer ride, I got so many cents per kilometer. This time it's like 1% less. You have to notice that. And humans just don't have the cognitive capacity to be eternally vigilant in the way that computers can be. One of the great ironies of the current so-called AI discourse is we say, oh, we're just going to like make the AI produce nonsense at scale, and then we're going to ask the human to vigilantly review all the nonsense and take the nonsense out and just identify the good stuff, the so-called human in the loop model, where you've got like instead of the current model where like instead of self-driving cars, we have a car that has a sensor that tells you if you put on your turn signal and there's another car in your blind spot, where the computer is being vigilant and you're just being a human. We're going to reverse that, where the computer is going to make 1,000 driving decisions per instant, and the human is going to have to be eternally vigilant and review each one of those. So instead of being a driver with like a machine assistance, the machine has a driver assistance. It's like the difference between being a driver and a driving instructor with a 16-year-old next to you in the car, and you're just sitting there waiting for them to accidentally nearly kill you so you can grab the wheel. It's the and so it's that last piece, right, where you have the computer doing stuff at scale quickly that really makes the differentiation, and that makes the monopoly and the platform models so much more dangerous and distinctive relative to the historic character of either monopolies or platforms or monopoly platforms.
Thank you, Cory. Could I turn to you, Guru? What would you kind of add, or would you have something you'd want to emphasize? How do you define digital capitalism? Where do you concur, or what what would you add to what Cory has already shared?
So I'm going to just complement the very detailed explanation that Cory just gave all of us. So the word digital capitalism has two parts, the digital and the capitalism. And I want to take a slightly historical perspective on this phrase. So capitalism is a way of organizing the economy, which is basically the forces of production, distribution, and consumption. And today it seems to us that there is only one form of economic system, and that's capitalism. And historically, if we go back, that was not the case until the downfall of the USSR and the alternate world, where we had a public production and distribution mechanism, which was called socialism or communism or variants of that. In digital capitalism, so what happened? The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and in the 90s, all over the world, we saw that capitalism is becoming more and more stronger, popular, as the alternative was collapsing over time. And digital technologies sort of exploded. They've been around for a long time. The internet is more than 50 years old. But let's say at the beginning...
Sorry, Guru, there's a couple people saying that the volume is a bit low. It sounds okay to me, but if you could just
is it better
speak,
now?
Speak clearly and as loudly as possible.
I've also increased the volume. So I was saying that the phrase digital capitalism has two parts, digital and capitalism. And although today it seems that capitalism is the only economic system that is there, but it was not the case until the late 80s. And digital technologies sort of burst into the global scene in a very big way at the beginning of the millennium when we had the dot-com boom towards the 2000, 2001. And what technology does, this people know that technology accentuates and increases and enhances what's already there. So because capitalism was already on the ascendant, the digital technologies further fueled capitalism. And as Cory said, when capitalism emerged out of the shadow of communism and socialism, because markets know best, then the state knows less, and therefore it meant deregulation. It meant reduction of rules that were earlier preventing monopolies from happening. And that is the thing that digital technology organizations, entities took advantage of. So digital capitalism is an economic means or economic system in which digital technologies increasingly play a bigger and bigger role in the production, distribution, and consumption of services. That's a simple definition for everybody. And I want to argue that because the alternate system of public system of production completely failed globally, and we are into a capitalist phase right now, that digital technology is further fueling capitalism, and capitalism is further fueling digital technologies through greater deregulation and reduction in taxation at the same time. So all over the world, cutting taxes and deregulating and increasing the role of the market has become more and more popular. So that's fueling capitalism in a particular way, not necessarily in the direction of perfect competition or large number of producers and sellers. Today, we have a situation where there are few entities that actually control the forces of production and consumption, what Cory called platforms. So today is one version of digital capitalism, which we call platform capitalism, which is characterized by control over the economy by few entities, and the owners of these entities are getting richer and richer, and they are further lobbying for greater privatization of the economic sphere, and also even in areas such as public services. So I would just like to stop at that.
Thank you, Guri, for those complimenting Cory's thing. So over to you, Sophia. What would you add to this discussion that you think is important on this?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? It's fine, my sound? Okay. Okay, so, well, first of all, I'm thrilled the scale that this course has. I'm seeing in the chat box people from all over the world, and I see 216 participants already. So really, I want to thank everyone for being so interested and so involved in this little project that started as an idea to have more information out there to help activists and people who want to know more about what's going on in the digital world. So I wanted to say that first of all. What I want to add to the amazing presentations that Cory and Guru did, it's something that maybe it's a little bit basic, but I think it's really important when we talk about digital technologies and when we talk about digitalization in general. So we're accustomed to talk about technology as it was something that it was given, something that it was made, and something that we cannot change, something that it's shaping our world, and we don't know what to do. I see a lot of questions about monopolization and about how to counterbalance this power, and I see this type of things coming over and over again. And the first thing that we need to notice is that technology is something made by humans, and it's a social construction. And this is something that it might seem obvious, but it's not so obvious when we talk about digital technologies and monopolization, because it seems like technologies are out there and there's nothing we can do about it. And there's an example that I like to raise a lot of times, that it's the bicycle. The bicycle was a technology that it was made, that it was created, and the first bicycles were these bicycles that had one big wheel and then a little wheel on the back. And these type of bicycles were made for men who were really fit and that could roll those bicycles in town and show themselves as, oh, what a great macho I am. Look at me, I can ride this amazing bicycle. And little by little, old men and old women and women in general that couldn't drive those bicycles started demanding new type of bicycles to be produced, that are the bicycles that we know now. the story around the bicycle is amazing, and it's a really feminist technology. If you look at the history of the bicycle, it's really feminist because it's the way that the first women who fought for the right to vote for women went through from town to town to ask and demand more women to get involved on the right to vote campaign. But that's not part of the story. What I want to point out here is that the same technology, a bicycle, could be designed in a way that supported the ideals of that moment, at that historical moment, to show how great men were, or could be designed in a totally different way, in a totally different shape, to be more inclusive and to have an idea of a society that is totally different from the perspective, a patriarchal perspective. So what I wanted to say here is that technology is a source of power. And the people who produce that technology have the capacity to shape and build digital technologies in the way they want to serve their own interests. And this is something really powerful to know and to notice, because when we come to the idea that the digital tools can be shaped in a different way, we can start thinking about a different way of economic society, a different way of shaping the world we live on. We don't need to comply with the idea of capitalist system built through digital technologies, which is what is actually happening now. When you see data coming in as a raw material of the digital technologies, and you see algorithms, how they work to transform that data into information, something that is really interesting is the way that those algorithms are maximized. Those algorithms are maximized with mathematical ideas of the neoclassical model of economic theory. And this is really important because what they are actually doing is shaping our markets in a neoclassical way, trying to deepen and deepen the capitalist system in an automatic way where platforms monopolize the market and order the market in order to have a more broad comprehension of what the capitalist system means and to try to subsume new ways of social interventions between human beings. So what they're actually doing is try to capture profits from different parts of human life that we haven't seen ever before. And when we think about the idea that the technologies that do this, that automate the capitalist system, can be shaped differently, we have a powerful idea there to hold on to, because we are starting to understand that the technologies are not given, they're not something that we need to comply with, but it's something that we can resist and that we can actually fight for a better future for everyone. So I wanted to start this webinar or this seminar course with a positive idea of trying to, we are all worried about the capitalist system and how it's deepening and how it's subsuming new ways of life. But the amazing idea also is that we shouldn't comply to that idea and that we can make differently. And this is something that it's really important to hold on to when we are thinking about a new digital future. So returning to the capitalist system, that's something I want to add, and then I will be done with the first question, is that this capitalist system is trying to transform itself. And I sometimes, and we will see that in the second unit with Cecilia Ricap talking about intellectual monopolies, but it's changing throughout the time, and it's trying to transform into a monopolist capitalist. This is not about competition. It's not about the market. They're monopolizing the markets, and they're doing intellectual property monopolization throughout the grabbing of data. So this is really important to notice because data is information and information is power. Technology is power, information is power. So they're becoming even more and more powerful. So that's why it's really important to study how this works, to understand how this works, and of course, to try to build strategies around it to counterbalance all that power that they are building behind the way they're automating the capitalist system into digital technologies.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I really appreciated the way you put our power back into this question right at the beginning. I think it's really, especially when we look at capitalism and now digital capitalism, it's easy to feel disempowered, but actually this message about our capacity to transform it is really important. And I think we've heard some really key elements there from the three of you about the significance of platforms, the significance of monopolization, the way that labor has been treated, and in a sense, the way that neoliberalism has really accelerated all these trends. I wanted to come to you next, Guru. Just are there any other kind of key dimensions of digital capitalism that you think are really critical for us to understand before we kind of move to look a bit more at the kind of impacts it's having that have not come into the discussion so far? To you, Guru.
Not that we haven't talked about. The one I wanted to mention was the whole issue of the producers. So if you look at the Soviet system of production, the worker has a particular role and worker collectives are a particular role. And as Cory explained, under the platform capitalism, what we are seeing is a continuous deterioration. It's not a rapid deterioration in a short period of time, because then we will, it's like the frog being boiled slowly. So every time the algorithm reduces the power of the worker, it does it incrementally. And like Sofia rightly pointed out, technology can be changed, and technology is something that we have created, and the rules for technology are what we have said. I would like to say, in the same way, capitalism is also a set of rules. And just like we should not take digital technology in its current form as given, as granted, something we cannot change, even the current form of capitalism is something we need to really worry about. So as an alternative, I would like to say that one of the things that we have been working on for the last year or so, for the last couple of years, is the whole idea that platform by itself is not an issue. A platform is an efficient way of organizing production and distribution, of connecting producer and consumer. So as an idea, it may not be a problem, but it's the commercial for-profit ownership. That's what makes a platform want to reduce the power of the worker bit by bit, reduce the power of the consumer bit by bit, and aggrandize all the power for itself. So the alternative to the current platform model is the platform cooperative model, which is what we have been working on, and I want to bring that into the discussion here. So last November, actually, we did a global conference in Trivandrum where we got workers' cooperatives from all over the world. So worker cooperatives, worker unions is an old idea, and they are trying to figure out what they can make sense of in the platform capitalism world. And the worker cooperatives came. The Kerala government is a very unique government because it is a government which is run by a communist party, which is being democratically elected year after year, term after term. And for them, obviously, the current model of platform capitalism is not something that they think is good for the economy and for society. So we brought the local government, the state government, and the worker cooperatives together to imagine how a technology platform, which is not owned for profit, but owned for public welfare, how it will work. And there are already examples of that across the world that we discussed and we are planning to take forward. So I think the whole idea of what Sofia said, can we reinterpret digital technology, platforms, capitalism, and can we define the rules of the game which are not going to harm workers and harm consumers on an ongoing basis? I think this is an important thing that I would like to bring to the discussion here.
Thank you, Guru. And Cory, I was wondering if you wanted to add anything. And one of the issues I was thinking, I know you've written quite a lot about, is we have this moment where, of course, some of the platforms like Facebook and so on are more powerful than ever, and yet people are ever more frustrated with them. So something you've coined that phrase, which I think has been very widely accepted, about Enshittification. And perhaps you could share something about that and any other things that you think are really important to keep in mind as we explore the key dimensions of digital capitalism.
So I agree. Enshittification is a very useful frame for understanding this. It does not lend itself to extremely short summarization. So I'm not going to get into a lot of the detail here because I don't want to monopolize our time. I will say that Enshittification describes the external symptoms of how platforms decay. So how we start with platforms that are quite good to their end users, and then they get a little worse to their end users in order to be good to their business customers. And this is, I think, that one of the crucial innovations of the theory is to acknowledge that they're also really bad to their business customers. Right? There's a certain sort of person who says, oh, well, Facebook cares about advertisers because they pay Facebook. They don't care about users because the users don't pay. Facebook is very bad to advertisers. So they're very bad to their business customers as well. They rip them off as much as they rip off their business users, their end users rather. And then finally, as they rip off everyone, they turn into a giant pile of shit. Right? They allocate all the value to their shareholders and they become hard to use. The other two pieces of the Enshittification hypothesis describe how this happens, right? The way that digital platforms can reallocate value very quickly because they are digital, because they can reprice or otherwise change the business offer very, very quickly. And then finally, why it's happening right now, right? Why it is that everyone all the platforms seem to be getting worse at the same moment. And, there's been a lot of hypothesizing about this, that it is the end of the zero interest rate policies promoted by central banks around the world. So suddenly they have to make money, whereas before they could just get free money from central banks. Other people say, well, you had these heroic founders, sort of the Steve Jobses and Jeff Bezoses, but then they left, and they left the business behind in the hands of these kind of bloodless bean counters who are now extracting everything they can. I don't think either of those are true. Facebook started to get a lot worse long before the zero interest rate policy ended. And, when Google's founders came back to Google, it got worse too. So I don't think we can ascribe this to the nobility of individuals or these macroeconomic phenomena. I think it's fairer to say, and this is the thing I want to add, is that although capitalism as a system of alienation has some irreducible problems that makes capitalism unsuited to do certain things, makes markets bad organizers of certain principles. There have been times when capitalists treated us better. And by us, I mean workers, end users, and business customers. And the thing that made them treat us all better is there were consequences when they treated us worse. And those consequences have gone away. That's what's changed. They don't fear competition anymore. You're not going to leave Facebook and go to another service, partly because Facebook has bought many of the other services, but also because Facebook has engineered things so that leaving a service and going to another one means leaving behind the value that the service gives you. So if you change phone carriers, you can still talk to your friends. If you leave Facebook, the people you left behind, you can't talk to anymore. They also don't fear regulation. They can violate our labor rights, our privacy rights, our consumer protection rights. And because the industry is so concentrated, they've captured their regulators. They don't have to worry about their workers anymore. Tech workers used to have a lot of power, and they would exercise it sometimes on behalf of their users. They would say, I didn't miss my mother's funeral and my children growing up in order to ship this product on time just to watch my boss make it terrible, so I won't do it. And the person across the street will give me a job if you fire me for insubordination. That's not true anymore either. The supply of tech workers is really caught up with demand. And so you see mass layoffs in the tech sector, which really disciplines those workers, stops them from gainsaying their boss. And the final piece, this is the most important one, is they don't have to worry about other technology that steps in and makes the service better when they make it worse. So, if you imagine a boardroom table where someone is talking about, a product team is talking about their website, and someone at the table says, hey, fellas, we all get paid based on how our ads perform. I've done the maths, and I think that if we make our ads 20% more obnoxious and invasive, that we'll get 2% more advertising revenue. Someone else around that table who doesn't give a damn about their users' well-being might still raise their hand and say, I like how you're thinking here, screw those users, but has it occurred to you that if we make the ads 20% more obnoxious, 40% of our users might go to a search engine and say, how do I block ads? And then the revenue from those users, it doesn't stay at the current level, doesn't go up to the 102% you're projecting. It goes to zero and it stays there forever because no one ever goes back to the search engine and types, how do I start seeing ads again? And so you have this disciplining force of counter technology. And what's happened over the 20 years of tech growth, consumer tech, internet tech growth, is that the regulatory capture that allows them to flout some laws also allows them to enforce laws against other technologists. Primarily, these are IP laws, like the anti-circumvention law that makes bypassing a digital lock into a serious crime in most of the world. In Europe, you have Article 6 of the Copyright Directive. In America, you have Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Canada brought this in 2012 with Bill C-11. Mexico brought it in 2020 with the new NAFTA agreement. Australia and New Zealand got it through their free trade agreements. It's all through the Central American countries through CAFTA. And these laws ban reverse engineering. And so if you want to remove the encryption around an app so that you can add an ad blocker to that app, you commit a crime, a very serious crime. In the United States, it's a felony punishable by 5 years in prison and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. And so if that boardroom table, they say, right, we're not going to make the ads worse in the app. Next order of business, how much worse should we make the ads in the, or in the website rather, how much worse should we make the ads in the app? No one says, what if our users go and type, how do I block ads in the app into a search box? Because if they type that into the search box, the answer is you can't. And so instead, they say, rather than making the ads 20% more obnoxious, why don't we make the ads 100% more obnoxious? And instead of a 2% gain, we can get a 10% gain. Because no one is going to block ads. More than half of all web users in the world have installed an ad blocker. It's the largest consumer boycott in the history of the human race. No one has ever installed an ad blocker for an app because it's a felony to make one. And so the constraint that operated on people who might not care about your well-being or might not care about the product or might not care about quality or might not care about fairness, but still discipline them, that constraint, all those constraints, counter technologies, competition, regulation, their own workforce, all those constraints have melted away. And so we get all the companies acting worse all at the same time. You can be a skeptic of capitalism and still think that some capitalists sometimes are better than other capitalists. Martin Luther King said, the law can't make a man love me, but it can stop him from lynching me. And in the same way, laws can constrain the conduct of firms so that the executive who loathes you and doesn't give a goddamn about your well-being still has to act like he cares. And I think that's important.
Thank you, Cory. We're kind of segueing into the kind of next question, which was going to be looking at the real social environmental impacts of digital capitalism that have got to be at the center of our thinking. I was wondering if, Sofia, you could share some thoughts there about what are the key implications that we're seeing of this kind of monopolization of power that has to be at the center of our struggles.
Yes, of course, Nick. And I'm going to build on what Cory had just said, that it's one concept that I want to bring in, that it's going to be part of our third week of the course, is the colonialist part and how these digital technologies are shaping not only the society where we are living, but also the world economy that we're living in the peripheral countries. And this is really important because, for example, Cory was talking about the fact that workers do not have that much power anymore. And this is partly because they are gathering workers from global South countries, and we are outsourcing our hours of working for big tech corporations. And those technologies get re-imported inside our countries, canned, stored in these devices. So this is really important because it's the same old way to think about how they extracted raw materials from the global South. Industrial products got re-imported to our countries. And the same is happening with digital technologies. We are exporting the raw material of the programming hours and the workers that they need, especially in India and in Latin America. This phenomenon is happening. I mean, Guru is here and he can talk hours around that too. And these platforms not only are shaping the markets in the way they organize because they are monopolies and because they are the brains of the markets and they shape the way the markets move internationally, but also they are shaping the way we think about industrialization within our own countries and the way we are going to be reaching higher salaries in the future. So right now, there's this myth that you have to study programming in order to become rich and to become a powerful worker. This is not true. This is not true at all. What they are trying to do is to have more workforce available so they can lower the salaries and they can push even further the alienation to these workers, because they have more, in Marxist terms, more of this army of workers that are just there without a work, a decent job. And so like that, they can lower the salaries. And actually, this is really used in the feminist way of thinking and the feminist speech of the right-wing governments around the world, because they are all the time saying, we need more women in tech, we need more women in tech. And it's actually because they need more workers in tech in order to counterbalance the strength that these workers used to have, to counterbalance the power that big tech corporations have. And so this is really important to start thinking, not only in a perspective around what's going on in the markets and what's going on in the platforms, but also what's going on in the relationship between Global South and central countries, and how we are serving that capitalist system in a way, in different ways, not only economically and socially, but also, and that's another point you mentioned, eco-socially, and how we are giving away our raw materials in order to build digital technologies, how we're giving away the data around our natural resources. For example, in Latin America, there's a great researcher that he studied how the NASA started grabbing data from the stars, putting different observatories in Latin America, and how they are building profits around that. So they're actually grabbing data from our natural resources and from setting stations to study the raw materials, the minerals, and the different ways of life and nature. And they are really consuming the resources in many countries around the world to build on digital technologies. We have data centers that are being placed in tax havens, and this is something really important because it's consuming water, it's consuming energy. We have cryptocurrencies also. So we have a lot of digital technologies and a lot of things that need to function better to serve the interest of this digital capitalism. And most of those resources, most of those natural resources that are needed are being extracted from the Global South. Not only, I mean, the Transnational Institute right now is starting huge research about how raw materials and minerals and critical raw materials are being extracted from Global South to central countries in order to build this type of digital technologies, chips, and so on and so forth, in order to serve the infrastructure that is needed to build this digital capitalism. So I wanted to add that part, and I don't know what other thoughts the other speakers have.
Thank you, Sofia. That's critical, and like you say, we will be exploring that, particularly some of the global inequalities and dimensions in our third session. Guru, I was wondering if, before we open up to questions, I was wondering if you'd like to add something on the kind of social environmental impacts. I'm thinking particularly, I know you work in the kind of the ed tech area. Someone raised in the chat also about the kind of power of platforms such as Sage and Elsevier. Perhaps you could share something also about the kind of the way that shapes out in the kind of in the spheres of education and more broadly in terms of socially as well.
Yeah. So one crucial difference that we see in the manifestation of capitalism as platform capitalism and the entities that were there before is that the entities that were there before did not have the power to shape us as human beings. So producers and consumers have been there since times immemorial because that's the very nature of an economic system. But no single producer or consumer could alter the behavior and desires of others. Now, what's happening in the current platform capitalism phase is that because platforms collect data about us all the time, and in fact, that's why even we use the term surveillance capitalism to describe the current phase of capitalism, because we are all under perennial surveillance. So what happens as a result of that is data about us is being collected all the time. Now this data about us is being collected to understand us better, but also to manipulate us. And therefore, we read research that which Meta has commissioned, that Instagram is a cause for very serious mental anxiety and other issues amongst adolescents all over the world. So I wanted to connect it to the education, that we always associate education with the formal school system. There is a college and there is a school, and we think young people go there and get and study and come out. But what we are seeing today is that platforms through social media and other mechanisms are actually the most powerful education system that we have today. It's a myth to think that learning is happening only inside classrooms. A lot of our way we learn things, we read, we listen to fake news, we are all the time subject to disinformation and misinformation, and our behavior is being manipulated all the time to meet the requirements of the platforms, what they want us to buy. That's all they want. But in return for that, they manipulate us. And therefore, I would think that there's a global crisis of education that we have now, where education through the formal institutions, which are motivated by public welfare, which is the schools and colleges, they are becoming less and less effective, which is what all faculty in colleges and schools will tell you, that learning in formal institutional space is reducing. On the contrary, social media is becoming a much more powerful agency for influencing minds. And it is not a coincidence that along with this, we are seeing more intolerance, hate news, social strife, political wars all over the world. And I want to say, and it's been established, that the way platforms operate has a very big role to play in that. So social strife is certainly a cause of the education system that we have built using social media platforms. The other point I want to make is that consumerism has gone through the roof. So always capitalism saw itself as superior because it said we can meet consumer requirements better than socialist models, which are not able to do that. But in today, because of e-commerce, the way people are able to access anything that they want to buy anytime and they digitally pay, it is creating the whole phenomena of fast consumerism, ultra fast consumerism, and that is creating huge problems in terms of environmental damage and destruction. So unless we have methods and regulation, not only of the platforms, but also in terms of consumer behavior, we are going to find that we are going to globally warm ourselves out of existence. So social strife on one hand, environmental degradation on the other hand, through ultra consumerism, are two significant challenges that we need to address in the era of digital capitalism, platform capitalism. Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, you definitely are.
Yeah. Thank you. Because I'm not able to see Nick. Yeah, Nick, go ahead. Nick, I'm done.
Yes, I had an unstable internet connection there for a moment. So I want to bring in also, hopefully the connection will stay stable long enough, but I wanted to bring in Pia now, who's been following some of the questions and answers in the Q&A section. Pia, do you want to pose them to speakers?
Yes, we're kind of losing you, Nick. Hope you get better signal. First of all, many thanks to everyone who participated. I see a lot of questions, a lot of people participating, which is great. I will spoil you a little bit. Many of these questions will be answered along the course, so don't worry if many things don't get answered right away. But one of the things that I saw repeatedly along the Q&As and the chat is about the main regulatory challenges, which are the main things that regulation and the legal frameworks are supposed to address, and mostly how will they cope up along with how innovation and how the digitalization goes way more quickly than the main regulatory challenges. That's one of the main questions. Then I saw a lot of things that were quite interesting. For example, is cooperativism with platforms an alternative to regulate or to address these issues? For example, I saw many questions regarding the national cooperation policy in India, or the urban company in India, which consists on cooperative solutions for these issues, and if there is an estimate of how much of national GDP is contributed by corporations falling under the definition of digital capitalism, which I thought, I don't know if we have an actual estimate, but some things we could discuss. And those are the main things that I could wrap up in main topics, but don't worry, many of these things will be addressed along this course.
Guru, you want to start answering or giving
Yeah.
some ideas?
I will talk a little bit. I think Nick is probably, his connection is weak. So very quickly, I wanted to make the point that I think everybody agrees that, and Cory said that in the beginning also, that the key difference between capitalism of yore and digital capitalism is that there is no regulation, no control of the capitalists, the persons who own the platforms. And because there is very little control on them, they can do anything that they want. And they can increase, toxicity of ads, any percentage, because they can gain from it, but they don't lose from it. So so regulation is agreed on, and there is a very big fear created by the platforms that if you regulate, you lose the benefit of the internet. And I will go back to what Sofia said very powerfully in the beginning, that we should not accept the various arguments that platforms put forward for their own survival and for their own defense. We can imagine a different world of platforms. There is no reason to accept the arguments that the platform owners give. So regulation can take various shapes. For example, one of the ways monopolies get created is the same business purchases or buys out competitors. So Meta owns WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook. All of them are complementing social media platforms. There is no reason why one entity should own all of them. And I think in the USA also, at the beginning of the anti-monopoly processes, AT&T was broken up into several entities. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that multiple businesses don't come under one entity. And of course, every time we do regulation, there is a loss. There will be some loss in terms of efficiency. There will be some loss in terms of profitability. But that is the price we have to pay for preventing the harm from happening. The second way we split is the same entity collects the data, processes the data, creates artificial intelligence using algorithms, provides services on AI to the public. So these different services again need to be split up, so that somebody who specializes in data collection should not be allowed to do the processing of that. And if you are able to prevent the different businesses from being operated by the same entity, we will reduce the power of these platforms. The third option is, we don't need to necessarily think that the internet or technology can work only if global entities manage it. So we need to think local, we need to think national, we need to think regional, we need to think local entities managing the technology platform, managing technology infrastructure, and federating into networks. So we're talking about capitalism as a network capitalism phase. So the way businesses are run now, which allow Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk to emerge, we need to attack it in all ways to make sure that we have the traditional capitalism, which is supposed to be the good one, with many entities, none of which can sort of control the economy and society. And I think regulation can be done in different ways. People have talked about it, and we need to put it into action. And we need to believe that it can be done, which is what Sofia said in the beginning. Yeah, thank you.
I have some thoughts if this is the right time to add them. So I think that in context of global regulation, one of the great advantages that emerges from the fact that these are global multinational cartels is that the facts that we learn when we prosecute a company in one country applies to that company in other countries. So right now there are cases against Apple for the way that it monopolizes its app store market. There's a regulation in the EU. There's a case in Japan. There's a case in the United States. And then there's regulatory investigations in other countries. All of the facts that emerge from each of those cases are applicable to all those other cases, right? It's the only part of global monopoly capitalism that is a feature and not a bug, is that the regulators can collaborate in ways that they couldn't before. I want to say one other thing about how we criticize these tech platforms. And I want to say that we shouldn't take their own claims at face value. So there's a kind of criticism that the tech critic Lee Vinsel calls crita hype. So this is when the company says something that's hype, and then we criticize it without interrogating it. So for example, AI, so the AI companies, they say that the reason that their sector is worth the $13 trillion that Morgan Stanley estimates it'll be worth is because it can do your job. But the actual evidence is that AI can't do your job, right? You know, Amazon just announced that they're closing down these shops that they had where the AI cameras would watch you as you walked around the shops and put things in your basket. And they didn't need a cashier because the AI would just send you a bill when you were done. It wasn't AI. It was 3 people in India watching each of those cameras. And they would each vote on what they thought you put in your basket. And if 2 of them agreed, that's the charge you would make. Indeed, there's this joke among certain Indian technologists that AI stands for absent Indians. And that, you know, the reality isn't that AI is coming to do your job. The reality is that your boss is being convinced that the AI can do your job. And so they fire you and replace you with an AI that doesn't do your job. Air Canada fired a bunch of its customer support frontline people and replaced them with a chatbot. And the chatbot was giving people wrong advice. So in Canada, there was a lawsuit where a Canadian flyer went to the chatbot and said, my grandmother just died and I need a bereavement flight for the funeral. What's the procedure? And the chatbot said, book a regular ticket and then within 30 days, send us your grandmother's death certificate and we will refund you the difference between the full fare and the bereavement fare. But it turns out that's not their policy. And when he tried to get his $700 refund, they denied it to him. And so he chased them first through their own procedure for 10 weeks. And then to the regulator where he finally got paid. So most people would not do this. So if one person has done this, probably 1,000 people just got ripped off by the AI and didn't get it. And so, you know, it's not that the AI can be an Air Canada customer service bot. It's that the AI can convince your boss who hates you and wants to fire you that he can do so and replace you with software. The difference is that when we run around and say the AI is going to do our job, it increases the stock price of the AI company because that is the AI company's pitch. We can do your job better than you can. When we interrogate the claim of the AI and say that the most profound victim of AI disinformation is my boss, who has been convinced by an AI salesman that the AI can do my job better than I can, or as well as I can, or acceptably, then we make the stock price go down. We criticize it intelligently. So one of the things that the social media platforms, the ad tech-driven social media platforms say, is that we have done what every villain through history failed to do. We made a system of mind control. Mesmer couldn't control your mind. Rasputin couldn't control your mind. MK Ultra's CIA mind control experiments failed. Neurolinguistic programming is garbage. Pickup artists are deluded fools. But we, with our big data, have figured out how to convince you of things that aren't true. We bypass your critical faculties and we reach into your mind and we change your mind. Now, the reason they make that claim is because they're selling ads. And so they go to people who are trying to convince you to buy something and they say, I don't know if you've heard, but our critics will tell you that we have succeeded where Rasputin, MK Ultra, and Mesmer failed, and we have built a mind control ray, and that is why you should give Facebook 40% more for the ads than you would for any other forum where you can get ads, because we can sell anything to anyone. Now, it's true there's something going on when they use big data to target an ad, but mostly what's going on there is they're identifying people who would otherwise have hard to find traits that might make them susceptible to this. So for example, we know that xenophobia and other forms of odious racist belief that turns workers against workers is more prevalent among people who are themselves economically precarious. And so if you're you know, a Modi Hindu nationalist, if you are Steve Bannon ginning up votes for Donald Trump, if you're any other kind of person hoping to make a worker view another worker as their enemy, then targeting you based on all of the things that correlate with economic precarity is a good way to reach someone. But it ignores the fact that the susceptibility to the conspiratorial belief arises out of material economic conditions and isn't being implanted by the mind control system. It's not a mind control system. It's a finding certain kind of person system. And so it's really important, because when we go around and we say it's a mind control system, the share price of Facebook goes up. But when we say monopolism has increased people's susceptibility to conspiratorial beliefs, and what Facebook does is target those people who its monopoly is making susceptible to conspiratorialism, we make its share price go down. So it's really important that we criticize these firms not on their own terms, but based on the observable material reality of how well they actually do what they claim they're able to do.
Thank you, Cory. I'm sorry, I had a bit of a problem with the internet there for a moment, but I'm back now. It looks more stable. So over to you, Sophia, I think, and then perhaps Pia, if there's any additional questions to bring to the conversation, that'd be great. Sophia.
Thanks, Nick, and I'm happy that you reconnect back again with us. Okay, so I saw a question on the chat box that is related with what Cory had just said, and it's really important because these type of discourses that are going around telling us that AI is going to replace us all, and that we're all going to be run by machines, and that AI is going to program itself, and that workers are not needed anymore. This has a political purpose, and the political purpose is that a worker who thinks that a machine is going to replace him or her, it's more eager or more willing to accept poor labor conditions. So the truth is that whenever you hear this type of speeches saying workers are useless, machines are going to do everything, what they're trying to convince you is do not fight for your rights. Do not fight for human rights online. Do not fight for labor rights in the digital world, because it's better to have a lousy job than not to have a job. So if you stay cheaper than a machine, then you're safe. This is what they're telling you in your subconscious. This is the message that they want to tackle in your brain. And this is not true. They still need workers. They need desperately the workers. They need the workforce. Who's going to build all these beautiful buildings that they're doing? Who are going to take care of human beings? Who is going to do all the work that the amazing work that we do? Who's going to have brilliant ideas? AI is going to do that? No, that's not the case. We human beings are still really useful. We are more useful than ever, and they need us. So this all speech, it means that they're trying for you not to fight for your labor rights. And this is something that is a hard-won truth in the trade union movement. We already know that. What it is important is that the labor force is changing, and the economy is changing, and the sectors are changing. So of course, there's some sectors that are going to disappear, and there's some sectors that are going to grow. This is part of the capitalist system, and we have seen this throughout history so many times. I mean, there's not so many blacksmiths anymore, and we don't build swords. We do other type of things. So this is really important. And the way that the economy is changing is rapidly changing and really fast changing. So the real question that we need to ask ourselves is, who's going to pay for the new training? Because companies want you to pay for your training, states to pay for your training, and not them. That's what it's really happening. They need to readjust the labor force, and they're blaming you. They're telling you, oh, you better start programming or studying STEM careers. Yes, to lower down your labor conditions. And this is what it all sums up to. I mean, it's that simple. If you see, for example, China, it's like the biggest source of digital power right now, and they're building great digital technologies, and they're growing like a new digital monopoly that is in Asia, and they create 40 million jobs a year. So it's not true that if you have digital technologies, that equals not to have jobs, losing jobs. The question that we need to ask ourselves is what type of jobs, what quality of jobs are we going to create? And this is something that they don't want us to discuss. We need new labor rights. We need to respect human rights online. And we need to build a new agenda where the states really get in power and try to build a new agenda of digital rights, or we say human rights online, because are the same rights that we are accustomed to discuss, but we need them in the digital world. And this is something that we need to discuss. And I'm happy to discuss it throughout the course, because it's the way that we're shaping the digital technologies. Again, what type of bicycle do we want? We want a patriarchal or whatever bicycle, or we want an inclusive and decent bicycle? This is the question that we need to ask ourselves. What type of digital technologies do we want to build? If we want to build digital technologies for decent jobs, or we want to have digital technologies to have more precarious jobs? This is the question that we need to ask ourselves, know if we are going to have a job or not. That's not the question, I think, personally, and the trade union movement, it's on that same discourse, trying to fight for new labor rights online.
Thank you, Sofia. Pia, do you have any other questions that you can bring from the Q&A?
Nick, I had a small comment on what Sofia said. Whenever there is time, I just would like to.
Sure, you go first, and then Pia can dig out some questions.
Yeah, of course.
So, both Cory and Sofia say that the way we shape the discourse, the way we use language is very important. I agree with that completely. So we don't need to accept the language that the companies are foisting on us. But at the same time, I do not think it's a question of only good job versus bad job. I think the history of technology in integration into economy, it's not new. Even the Industrial Revolution came up with equipment that displaced human beings. At that time, it was physical labor of human beings that was displaced by machines. And if you needed 20 people to work on a farm with a tractor, you might need 1/10 of that. So because I think it's important not to miss out that part also, that with AI, what is AI? AI is nothing but using data to be able to predict certain things. And like Cory says, many times the claims made by the companies may be bogus, but it's not that every claim is bogus, because yes, we can predict human behavior in many situations, and the AI along with robotics can certainly take over many jobs which are requiring physical labor. And we know that even the white collar jobs that require us to use our intellectual capacities, they're also getting displaced by AI. A lot of bad jobs are being created, but lot more good jobs are going away. And I just want to extend what Sofia is saying. So I agree with her when she says in the end that it's not whether you want digital technology, it is what kind of digital technology you want. And I want to add to this debate and discussion that as a society, as a polity, we will have to look at technologies that don't displace labor. And somebody will come and say this technology is very good, it's going to increase profits, it's going to displace labor. And the political establishment will have to say, no, we don't want that technology. And I'm speaking from India, where for the last 10, 15 years, there has been no job growth at all. Women participation in labor markets is declining year after year. So jobs is a catastrophic situation in India. It is catastrophic in the US as well. And the role of digital technology has a role to play in that. So while not disagreeing with Sofia, I think we cannot forget the fact that digital technologies and the way they are designed and implemented is a very serious threat to the nature of jobs as well as the availability of jobs. And we need political regulation and wisdom to address that fact for our well-being.
Thank you for that addition, Guru. Pia.
Thank you, Nick. I've seen many questions regarding what Guru just said, especially regarding job automation. So I think that's probably answered. But one other topic that was mainly raised in terms of this is what happens with monopolization. The main questions that were raised in terms of this were which are the implications of monopolizations in a digital industry, especially whether increased competition among smaller actors would be preferable, the potential for seizing monopolized companies as public utilities, and the advantages of internal planning and coordination versus competition. But mainly, if competition would help to solve one of the main issues, or monopolization will be the answer to promote innovation, which would be the best structure in terms of digitalization.
So I guess the question is anti-monopoly capitalism enough? Is part of the question really behind some of that. So who would like to take that?
Maybe
Cory,
I
go
could
for
start.
it.
Yeah. So I think that that this is a thing I was trying to get at in my initial intervention here, is that it's important to understand that while there's some conduct that we want to extinguish and other conduct that we want to increase the efficiency of, that both of them rely on competition. So, you know, one of the things that competition does pretty reliably is reduce the labor, energy, and material budget for a manufactured good. One of my very favorite economics papers was written by some Bank of Canada economists, one of whom collected catalogs from IKEA, and their spouse said, "You need to do something with the catalogs or I'm going to throw them away." And so they decided to do a study on these catalogs. And what they found was that the correlate of a product, a SKU that stayed in the IKEA catalog over long timescales, was that the amount that it weighed, the number of countries it was made in, and the shipping dimensions, right? So how compactly it was packed, went down every year. So in other words, competition was driving IKEA to find ways to make this thing lighter, smaller to ship, more efficient to ship, and if we use a number of countries of manufacture as a proxy, to have fewer labor inputs. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? Like it's, you know, if you have two identical bookcases in terms of the function that they fill, and one of them has half the material and energy budget of the other one, from the perspective of a planet or a person with books, both of those things are good. So there's some things that competition actually does improve, right? There's some things where firms do better. Sometimes we could realize those gains without competition, but there's nothing wrong per se with that theory. There's other conduct that we want to extinguish altogether. So there's some things that firms do well, and they keep getting better at, that we want them to stop doing. So think about Facebook spying on us, right? After the GDPR was passed in the European Union, the immediate effect was that all of the small European ad tech companies just ceased existing right away. And that was for a couple of reasons. One is that Facebook and Google, because they're playing an iterated game, they want to be around for 20 years. They understand that if you kill the sheep, you can only eat it once, but if you shear the sheep, you can come back every year. And so they're a lot less aggressive in the kind of surveillance they do than these smaller companies. The other thing is that they just had tons of resources, right? Like Facebook and Google have enough money that they can pay enough lawyers to pretend that they're based in Ireland. And Ireland's a crime haven, because every tax haven is a crime haven, because any kind of company that can pretend to be Irish could also pretend to be based somewhere else, like Luxembourg or Cyprus or, you know, the Netherlands on a bad day when it's doing double Dutch Irish sandwiches. And so a country that hopes to retain a multinational's domicile has to be very friendly to it in a regulatory environment. So only the largest firms can take advantage of this and can pretend to be Irish. Ireland is a country where the data commissioner hears about 17 major cases a year, compared to Germany, where 500 cases are heard. And so they just get to avoid the consequences of this regulation. All their smaller competitors are snuffed out, and they continue, and they get better and better at spying at us every year. And we want to extinguish that conduct. And to extinguish that conduct, these companies need to be small. They need to be smaller than the governments that are regulating them. And so it's really important that we think about this as a democratic fundamental, as well as a theory of how capital markets work. You know, when IBM was sued by the US government for monopolization, there was a lawsuit that went from 1970 to 1982. And every single year for 12 consecutive years, IBM paid more outside counsel to fight the Department of Justice than all of the lawyers working at the Department of Justice combined, right? They outspent the US government for 12 consecutive years. And in the end, they delayed long enough that Ronald Reagan was elected, and he dropped the case against them. So it's really important to know that firms that are too big to fail and too big to jail and too big to care whether or not you like their products or not, those firms are a challenge to any kind of democratic regulation. And so it's really important that we don't just accept the capitalist logic of competition, but that we also understand that good governance and evidence-based policy is incompatible with monopoly.
Thank you, Cory. Sofia.
No, I think it was said most of the things that I wanted to raise. And also we're going to have a session on monopoly and how they're gaining more power. So I don't want to like jump into our next week's session, but more invite you all to keep on discussing in the next week's session that it's going to be specifically about corporate power and monopolization of digital markets.
And Guru, would you like to add something?
No, I will. I think I will let the viewers enjoy it in the next session that Sofia is promising them.
Okay. Well, I guess then my final question would be: is something is more broadly a lot of people here are involved in social environmental movements for struggles for justice, fighting not necessarily in the digital sphere. They might be involved in kind of fighting a mine, but it's all interconnected, of course. That mine might be providing some key resources for the digital infrastructure. So just more generally, what's if activists working in this area, whether you have particular who are starting to grapple with this issue, what do you think are both the opportunities and obstacles that movements, or all sorts of movements for justice, need to grapple with as we fight digital capitalism? How should we consider these issues as part of our struggles, and to what extent should we kind of where do we need to do more work, and what kind of perspectives should we take as we move forward? So I guess some general advice to activists who make up a large part of this course. So perhaps I could start with you, Guru.
Yeah, very quickly, because we have a little time. We had a very great leader who fought for the freedom, not only of the Indians, but also of the marginalized groups in India, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. And he had 3 words for any protest, for any movement for justice: educate, organize, and collectivize. So the first thing I think is we need to educate ourselves about this phenomena. And I want to say that we sort of think digital technology is something very unique and something new. But if you have to look at technology historically, it's not the first technology. So if you look at technology, the way it has come, every time technology is used by the powerful to oppress the powerless. And digital technology is just following that thing. So we need to tell ourselves, how did we fight similar battles of old? And Sofia spoke about how we didn't accept the bicycle as it was. We changed the shape of the bicycle. So if we educate ourselves about what is this digital technology, why is it able to hold power over us? What is monopoly? How did monopoly become the nature of capitalism from competition? What has taxation got to do with the issue of monopolies becoming so rich and powerful? What do tax havens have to play in this process? How do closed protocols enable monopolies to happen? And how network effects enable monopolies to happen? So I think educating ourselves is the most important thing. And that's why this course is there, of course. Thanks to TNI for bringing this course on. We need to understand this phenomena if we are going to oppose it. And the second thing is organize. We need to collectivize. The networks are powerful. The activists have to network themselves. And that's what is already happening. But, and Cory mentioned that regulators across the world should network so that they're able to catch on to lacunae identified in one jurisdiction and punish the corporate in another jurisdiction. That's what, for example, is happening to Uber all over the world. Everywhere workers are fighting Uber on the same principles. So educate, organize, and agitate. And I think at the end of the day, we have to come to the streets. We have to protest against our governments. We have to hold the corporations accountable. So educate, organize, agitate are the 3 phrases that Ambedkar spoke, and I think they're relevant to all of us today as well.
Absolutely. So Cory, do you want to add, what would you add? Do you have I can't hear you. Can other people hear Cory?
No, actually.
Sorry about that. I sometimes
You're
forget
okay.
I have a hardware button on my microphone. And of course, now that someone has forgotten to turn off mute, it's officially a Zoom conference. It's not a Zoom conference till that happens. So I want to bring in some thoughts from the kind of economists that we don't usually listen to, someone from the right. There's a guy called Ronald Coase, who won the fake Nobel Prize in economics. If you're intimidated by economics, one of the things you should know is that economists got sad because nobody thought economics was a science. And so they found someone else called Nobel to give a Nobel Prize in economics. It's like it's like this consolation prize in economics. Coase won the fake Nobel Prize in economics after writing a paper called The Theory of the Firm. And The Theory of the Firm is a good paper, even though he's not my guy on anything else. And what he sets out to understand is, like, why do we make institutions? Like, what is the point? What connects the Vatican, the mafia, a trade union, a multinational corporation, a country? Why do they exist? And he says the reason they exist is that one person can only do what one person can do. And if you want to be superhuman, you need to collaborate with someone else to do it. And collaboration is hard. If we're both knitting a sweater and I'm knitting the left sleeve and you're knitting the left sleeve, and we find out at the end that we've both knit the left sleeve, we've wasted our time. We haven't been more efficient. We haven't been superhuman. We've been subhuman. We've done less than one human can do. And so you need to have a meeting, and you need to coordinate. You need to do a thing to make sure that I'm not unraveling what you're raveling up. And that's expensive. Every hour that you spend in a meeting is an hour you don't spend organizing or being in the streets or, doing something that like furthers your goal. And so the point of the institution is to reduce the amount of meetings you have to have, reduce the coordination costs. We can make an encyclopedia or an operating system with so much less top-down coordination than we used to have. It's not that there's no coordination, but the coordination budget has fallen through the floor. Now, look, I cut my teeth as an activist riding a bicycle around the streets of Toronto all night long with a bucket of wheat paste that's, flour and water, a brush, and hundreds of handbills advertising anti-nuclear proliferation posters. And I was rolling around gluing these to telephone poles, right? That is so much work to mobilize people to a protest. The thing the internet does is it lowers the transaction costs of taking collective action so that we can get stuff done. Now, when we look at the mainstream critique of tech platforms, especially as it relates to conspiratorial, xenophobic, and polarized views, so-called populism, one of the main critiques of it is that it allows people who hold disfavored views to find one another and coordinate their actions. And that is not a bug, it's a feature. It's how you found yourself here today. We can't let ourselves get sucked into a critique of the internet that says that it should be more expensive to find people who agree with you and get stuff done with them. Right? We have to fight our adversaries on ideological grounds, but not on this structural ground. The part of technology that we want to keep when we get rid of techno-capitalism is this part. The part where we find each other and deliberate together and then take action together.
Thank you, Cory. Sofia, final word, and then we need to close the session.
Final words really quick because we are on time. And I totally support what Guru and Cory said. And I want to, last but not least, always focus on that the fact that states should be doing more. And we as citizens, we should be demanding more from states, because it's amazing to use alternative technologies. But at the end, that's an individualistic solution to a bigger problem, that it's the monopoly that they have and the power they have, and we need to counterbalance that power. And in order to counterbalance that power, we need to educate, organize ourselves, agitate, and demand accountability from states, regulation, and that corporations comply with our regulations and our laws locally, regionally, and internationally. And this is really important. And for that, we need frameworks that are suitable. And for that, we need to be more active on these spaces where these regulations are being made in order to make corporations settle with those rules and comply with those rules. Because the solution has to be collective. It cannot be individualistic, because what Cory said.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sofia, for concluding. And thank you so much, Cory and Guru, for leading this opening conversation. It's been a really great session in kind of opening up some of the issues that we'll be exploring in this course. And as Guru was saying, educate is one of the key parts of this that we need to do. And that's very much our intention here, to educate and in order to improve our organizational efforts, which will ultimately need to be done in person, on the streets, interacting with states and so on. So thank you so much for opening up this conversation, and thank you for the whole TNI team and for others for their organizational support. This is the first of our masterclasses. So next week, we will be opening up on Monday the module of our course, which will be on the focus is on the big tech corporations. And so on Monday, we will open up the course. This was done particularly with our partner SOMO, who did some of the materials. And then on Wednesday, at the same time as today, we will be joined by Margarida Silva, who's a researcher at SOMO, Cecilia Ricap, who's an associate professor in economics, who's done a lot on kind of intellectual monopoly capitalism, including a book, and James Schneider, who's part of a co-convener with the Global Union, which has been involved in a big campaign, Make Amazon Pay. So some of the resistance to some of the big tech corporations. If you have any problems with the Moodle course, we're also having a special troubleshooting session tomorrow. That's Thursday at 2 p.m. Amsterdam time, Central European Summer Time. I'll put the link in the chat. So if you have any issues with the Moodle course and you just want to try and troubleshoot it, then do join that session then. Thank you again for joining us. Please, if you can, fill in the poll just to give you a quick evaluation on this course. And we'll leave the chat open for about a minute, just so you can fill in a poll and just give us some quick feedback, and then also finish off your conversations in the chat. I just want to say all the TNI's web recordings will be available on the website. So this has been recorded, and we will be uploading it within the Moodle course system. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, everybody. Pleasure to have been a part of this event.
Yeah, likewise.